The latest CBS News Battleground Tracker shows a divide among the two parties, as you would expect, over immigration and the separation of families.
Joining us now to break down those numbers is CBS News Elections and Survey Director Anthony Salvanto. So thanks for joining us, Anthony.
Thank you, guys.
So this is certainly a topic that has divided not only politicians, but certainly many people here. You took a look at some of the numbers. The treatment of immigrants at the border has been at the forefront for many people, and a lot of Americans are paying attention to how their party is responding. Break down how Americans are responding to the separation of children from their parents.
Well, we knew right after the story started coming out that most Americans didn't approve of the separation. But then after the president signed the executive order, we interviewed people and said, okay, what comes next? And what we found was a really dramatic difference in how much priority the government should put on reunifying the separated families, as you're starting to see now. And, you know, Democrats and folks, you know, liberal folks, also a lot of moderates and independents, were all saying high priority on the reunification. But a lot of Donald Trump supporters were making that a lower priority, and that kind of stood out. But you know, you go up to sort of a larger picture of this, because look, it's a complicated policy, and there's a lot to sort through. What are the general values that people want to express out of this policy? So we asked, should people be coming across the border be punished because they're doing something illegal, or should they be treated well as an example of how America treats people generally? And there was a big divide on that too. And the folks who saw this as an illegal activity and stressed that they should be punished in some fashion versus, and those were a lot more the folks who were Trump supporters. A lot of conservatives felt that way going forward. And then there were a lot of folks who said that they should be treated well. That answer came more from people on the left. So your view of who these people are matters a lot in what you think the policy ought to be.
And how important will it be come this November? And I'm curious, too, about independence, because that is going to play a significant role, I'm guessing, in the midterm elections. If you were an independent who didn't like Hillary Clinton and you thought Donald Trump was a good change agent, you voted for him, even though you probably had some issues with some of the things that he said or some of the things from his past. This one, though, seems to be resonating with a lot of people, including independents, this issue.
Yes, and look, I mean, there's on the political side of this, you see the Donald Trump supporter, the base. We use that term all the time. It includes Republicans, but it's a lot of independents as well. In fact, the biggest connection on this is whether or not you strongly support the president, and there you fall in line with a lot of those immigration policies, much more so even than just the Republican label in general. Republicans have been often divided on this. So politically, what that means is, you know, the president and the way he's talking about this is clearly looking at this, I think, as a base election, as a turnout election. If people are going to come out who support him, then that will help his party down the ballot. But you know, I think for one thing, you see on the left, among Democrats, among liberals, people are more likely to say that they think this will be important in their vote and that it's more likely to make them pick a Democrat for Congress. We've got a long way to go. But I also noticed that a lot of those folks don't typically vote in midterms. So if this is going to be an issue, Vlad, I think it's going to be something that where the story has to sustain and still be there, motivating people. I also don't think that, I think when you look at the numbers and you see the way that most folks who support stricter policies believe that at least some, if not many or most, of the folks coming across the border are criminals. That's how they describe them, as gang members. Those perceptions are clearly part of what appears to be some of the messaging now.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, most of the states are not border states, so this is not happening in their backyard. But we do have some races for senator that are heating up. Arizona, Texas. Florida as well, Florida often deals with a different type of immigration issue, but these are all states that have to deal with immigration in a crisis form in some way or another. Is this national conversation having an impact on the races there?
It appears to be in some fashion. You know, we should stress that, you know, among voters, and particularly among Donald Trump supporters, stronger supporters, you know, these concerns that they have echo whether you're 20 miles from the border or 2,000 miles from the border. We see that consistently. But back to the idea of these Senate races. In Arizona, border state, there's a race where the Democrats would like to try to pick up a Senate seat. Right? Jeff Flake is retiring. He's pushed back against some of the president's rhetoric, of course. You know, among Republicans there, his favorables are very low. So you start to see a sense of where the Republican Party, at least in Arizona, is headed. They're clearly with the president on this. But if you do a matchup on the Democratic senator, who's running against a large number of Republican who are competing in the primary. The Democrat has the lead there. You go to Texas, and we find that Ted Cruz has a lead in Texas. That's a state, perhaps not surprising, shouldn't be surprising actually, it's a very Republican state, but it's one where the Democrats are hoping that over time the demographics change, the narrative changes, and maybe they can start to compete in Texas. I think that seems like it's, if it ever happens, is still pretty far off. And then you go to Florida, and this is very interesting because it's sort of a piece that hadn't been on the board for a while, on people's radars a lot. Bill Nelson, the incumbent Democrat, looks like he's in a race, even race, or down, really down, to Governor Rick Scott, who is running for the Senate seat. So that's a place where the Democrats could lose a seat, all of which adds up to the big picture. The Senate appears to be more likely to, you know, that the Republicans would hold majority control of the Senate, and more of that back and forth on who wins the majority might end up being in the House this year.
That's interesting. You know, the thing about Rick Scott is that sadly he's had to deal with a couple of school shootings. That has probably really increased his profile, and he's kind of bucked the Republican Party in terms of how he's been handling those school shootings. So I wonder what it says about sort of Republican appeal, you know? Yeah,
his approval ratings are really high in our poll, and so it speaks to some of that, to that point. He also does relatively well with Hispanic voters, which is something that you don't see among Republicans in other states. And, you know, I think Ed O'Keefe reported as well that he's made efforts to try to court that vote in Florida. So it does speak to, you know, a lot of this as you go through the primary season is going to be a discussion about which direction each party goes, and that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, great. Anthony Salvanto, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Always good to see you, man.